So, what happens to us because of sin, and what does sin deserve? We are separated from God because He is so pure. God can't love sin. Worst of all, our sin makes us God's enemies. Sin turns our heart black and far from God. The world becomes broken. Think about sadness. This illness, COVID, that's all around at the minute, which separates us from each other. So we can't hug Granny. We can't have birthday parties. We can't all be together in church at the one time. We can't sing, which some of you I'm sure are missing. Think of all the waste and the mess we create. How we destroy the world and all its resources, with the plastic in the oceans, with forest fires, with fumes and pollution, and with people just hating each other. All of that is caused by sin. Litter left behind, people not having enough food to eat. Here and in poorer countries as well. Think of all the famine and everything. Sin is like a mist that comes in and separates us from God. And if you're up early enough these days, you may well see the mists coming in, because October has these seasonal differences, so we know all about it. Sin hides us from God. It separates us. It's like a big sheet has come down and separated us completely, so we cannot see and we cannot hear God. For us this week, the memory verse is found in Romans chapter 6, verse 23, and it's very simple to remember. For the wages of sin is death. So wages is another word for payment. It's what you get for whenever you work. You get paid. So the payment of sin is death, and death means total separation from God. Our sins deserve to be punished. And we think of the story in Joshua 7. So maybe you remember that when we were doing the 10 Commandments. We were looking at the commandment that said, do not steal, which is in Exodus. And the story that we used to illustrate do not steal was found in Joshua chapter 7. So those of you who have a Bible can look up Joshua chapter 7 and see what it says. But perhaps you remember the man involved in it. Give the background. The Israelites had arrived in the promised land, and they'd arrived at Jericho. And Jericho was a huge city. And they thought, how are we going to beat the people in here? But God told them to march around Jericho several times, and they did so. And then the walls of Jericho fell down with a big crash. And they were told not to take anything from the people of Jericho. Nothing was to be left. Everything was to be destroyed. And one Israelite called Akram decided he wasn't going to do that. So he found some treasure, and he really liked that treasure. So he decided he would take it back to his tent and he would bury it under his tent. And he thought he got away with it. And Joshua then, with the other Israelites, went on to the next city called Ai, and they were very badly defeated, and lots of people died. So it was a big failure, and Joshua said, why have we failed? And God said, someone had sinned. And eventually they narrowed it down to Akram, and Akram was killed. He had hid the treasures in his tent. He had disobeyed what God had said. And as I said, the key verse this week, the memory verse, is the wages of sin is death. And that's what happens. And I'm going to show you now another video, which is the story of David, which again talks about the consequences of sin. So look at the video just below, all about David.